I learned how to shrimp from a John Danaher video after training jiu-jitsu for at least a year, probably more like a year and a half. That is until today. Today was class number 16, shrimp escape from side mount, and today was honestly the first time I ever had like an intentional shrimping lesson. What do I mean by that? Well, at my old school, part of our warm-up, you have to shrimp up and down the mats. You guys know how that is. And I remember one time, the head honcho, the instructor, the guy whose name was on the wall, told my private lesson instructor, Greg, he said, "Hey man, that guy doesn't know how to shrimp. What's wrong with the shrimp? Why does he know how to shrimp?" And so Greg says to me, "Hey man, you got to work on your shrimp." And I said, "Okay, what am I doing wrong?" And they demonstrated to me and said, "This is how you do it." And I'm like, "Okay." And for whatever reason, I couldn't do it. And I chalked it up to being a big guy. I said, well, maybe my body doesn't move that way. I'm too heavy. I don't have the core strength, whatever. And kind of forgot about it for a little while. It wasn't until maybe 2 weeks later, I was watching a John Danaher video I ordered off of BJJ Fanatics. I ordered it probably a year before during the Black Friday special or something when it was on sale. And I remember watching this John Danaher video and he went over the power shrimp. And I was like, what is a power shrimp? So I watched it and I was like, oh, is that what I'm supposed to be doing? Because I had seen them shrimp up and down the mat. I had seen my instructor show me what a shrimp is supposed to look like, but I didn't understand the goal. It wasn't articulated to me. And so today at Gracie University, Laguna Hills, training the shrimp from side mount was kind of weird. It was weird for two reasons. Reason number one, I felt like I kind of already knew it, but then it was weird because there was no resistance. The reason why that's weird is because sometimes when I'm drilling, I'm like, this is never going to work in a roll, right? And other times when I'm drilling, I'm going, holy crap, I wish I knew this before I ever got myself into a roll. And it's a weird catch-22 because you have to really ask yourself, what exactly are you training for? And so today, doing class number 16, the shrimp escape from side mount, I got to work on 3 different variations of how to freaking shrimp. Now, it was good and it was not good at the same time, and I'll tell you why. It was good because I got to work on things that I never got to work on before and kind of break it down in a low stress, low competition, low intensity environment. So I was able to play with some things, some positioning, to figure out some things that were hard for me in the past that I think will be very valuable in a role or in a competitive kind of a role down the road. However, it was not good because I'm not sure that it'll work as well as it works in this environment against a resisting, competitive opponent. And that's where the whole "what are you training for" question comes into play, because it's like, are you training to beat the untrained guy on the street that might try to fight you in, a self-defense kind of situation? Or are you training to beat the guy at the gym across town when you go up against him at the Naga or Grappler X or whatever the hell tournament coming up in 2 months, right? What is your objective? What is your goal? And even though my old school was not a competition school, it was more about the roles and about the competition between you and someone else who knows jiu-jitsu. I remember asking my instructor, Greg, I said, hey man, are we ever going to put on those boxing gloves and like punch each other and kind of do that thing? And he's like, nah, we don't really do that very often. I said, okay. And, we did defense against a bear hug and headlocks and whatever. And so I kind of asked him, after we had drilled escapes and, self-defense stuff for over a year in our private lessons, I said, dude, what's next? And he goes, well, now you kind of have to train for jiu-jitsu versus jiu-jitsu. And I said, okay, how, why, where, when? Am I going to fight a guy with jiu-jitsu experience? He's like, well, you can compete. I don't want to compete. Well, then what's it for? This is like the old Kung Fu movies. It's like, do you think your Kung Fu's pretty good? Yeah, so it's our Kung Fu school versus that Kung Fu school. Our master versus that master. Our stuff has to be the best. Our stuff is the best, the strongest, the toughest, and whatever. And I thought, okay, when are we ever going to test this or prove this? If I don't want to compete, what would be the point? And I don't know what the point was. And so now with Gracie University, the point is clearly self-defense against an untrained opponent. Yes. And once we get that down, then we can start working on jiu-jitsu versus jiu-jitsu, which is more of a game. Maybe it's just a hobby. Maybe it's the social aspect, the physical fitness aspect, the mental health aspect. Maybe those are the reasons why you train. But whatever the reason is, you got to have a firm, solid foundation. And so just drilling with low pressure, low competition, low intensity, and having the ability to ask questions and break things down methodically really helped me with my shrimp today. And I think my shrimp was probably already okay, but having these different variations really helps too. So I enjoyed the class, but more importantly, I started thinking about what's my motivation, what's my objective? Because in my old school, when they told me you're done with self-defense, and now it's jiu-jitsu versus jiu-jitsu, that shifted my whole focus. And later on, when we had our little misunderstanding, they're like, well, show me all these self-defense techniques. And I'm like, bro, we haven't done this in like a year. So it's weird because I'm like, what is the goal? What is the motivation? What's the purpose of the training? There's a video I just watched, I'll put it right here, a couple of days ago on YouTube about how Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu no longer works for self-defense because the way we train and the things we train are no longer geared towards self-defense. They're geared toward, you know, single leg X and, you know, heel hooking a guy in, you know, the ADCC trials, right? And I think the same thing happened in Taekwondo, right? When it became a sport, it kind of fell apart and became more competition oriented. So it's like, are you training with intention? When you're training, who are you training for? That's the question I'll leave you with. Who are you training for? Are you training to be ready for the guy across town who also knows jiu-jitsu? Are you training for the guy down the street? Or do you not even care about this if you're just training for yourself, for your social health, your mental health, your physical health? What's your motivation? Because that was the question I had to ask myself today. What's the motivation? Clearly what the Gracie Combatives thing is for self-defense against an untrained opponent. But after that, then what? Are you going to compete? Are you going to teach this stuff? Is it going to be your business, your livelihood? What is the goal?